course, is a word that comes up very often. Krishna has lotus eyes, a lotus navel, lotus-like hands, feet are lotuses. And so lotus, Prabhupada explains, is considered the last word in beauty. And Krishna's own world, the spiritual world, is shaped like a lotus with so many petals. And so the spiritual master is always residing in that world. His feet are always residing in that world. And so his feet are considered lotus feet. And then we can also remember Krishna when we remember the lotus feet of our spiritual master. And also feet is so important that the foot is the lowest part of the body, a very humble part of the body, always serving the rest of the body. So similarly, we look to the lotus feet because we want to serve the Guru, who is situated with Krishna in the lotus-like kingdom of God. And then Kevala Bhakati Sadma. These are very important words. That it is through these lotus feet, there's the only way. It is the abode of bhakti. The lotus feet of the Guru are the abode of bhakti. There is no other abode. So the only way to get to that position of becoming close to the spiritual master is through this process of bhakti yoga. The only way by which we can attain this pure devotional service is through the worship of the service to the spiritual master. And so therefore, Narottam Das Thakur says, Vando mui savadana mate. That means with great care, with great attention, I am bowing down to those lotus feet, knowing that if I want to attain bhakti, that it is through the mercy of the spiritual master. And to, in any way, minimize that mercy or denigrate it means that that treasure of bhakti will not be attainable by me. So then he says, Yahara prasade bhai. Bhai means brother. It doesn't come out in the translation, the English translation, but it means brother. And he's saying here that by the mercy of the spiritual master, e bhava turiya yai, that I can cross over this material ocean. This material ocean is so vast, we've been in it for innumerable lifetimes, experiencing again repeated birth, old age, disease, dwindling, and death. So to cross over this enormous ocean, there is only one way, and that is by the service to the spiritual master's lotus feet. And then he says, the last line of the first verse, Krishna Prapti. This Prapti, there are different yoga siddhis or perfections. So one of them is called Prapti Yoga. That means you can obtain anything from any part of the world. Prabhupada said he knew of a yogi who was sitting somewhere in India, and he got some ripe pomegranates from Afghanistan. Right? So this is this Prapti Siddhi. So and here it's referring to Krishna Prapti. We can attain Krishna by this process. So I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. Krishna Prapti hoy yaha hoite. So this is our goal, to attain Krishna's mercy. So it's done through this process. So it's not a casual thing. It means that we've been in this world for so many births, and to actually come in contact with a personality who can give us genuine knowledge about who we actually are, and who actually the Supreme is, and how we can connect with that Supreme, this is the greatest treasure. And so we see the spiritual master in that way, and then naturally we feel attached to him for his gift to us. So these next lines are really perhaps the most moving for me. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya. Here the translation is the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Mukha means mouth. Guru Mukha. Padma, again lotus. Because the words of the spiritual master are always describing Krishna, who in so many ways is compared to a lotus, as I was mentioning. When we hear lotus, we can think of Krishna. And so Guru Mukha Padma.
move it to that side.
Then this word, chittete korea aikya. Chittete can refer to our consciousness, which refers perhaps to the mind. We're in this body today because of our minds. The mind is so powerful, we tend to underestimate it. But we know from personal experience, everything can be the same, the weather can be the same, our relationships can be the same. We can feel okay, but one morning we feel happy, the next morning we feel depressed. It's all in the mind. It's the mind. Something terrible can happen to two people, the same terrible thing. One person learns from it and feels impelled to go on and encouraged. Another person becomes overwhelmed and discouraged and depressed. It's the mind. The mind is so powerful. It is the mind is the reason that we're here, or the consciousness, you could say. So, chittete korea aikya. This word aikya means unified, oneness. Not oneness in the sense that I become one with the Guru, but oneness in purpose, oneness in desire. So this is very important, that our prayer is that those words that are coming from the mouth of our spiritual master, we want our consciousness to be one with those words. We don't want to say anything that contradicts the words of our spiritual master, neither do we want to do anything that contradicts those words. And if we can have that oneness of desire, that oneness of purpose, we will feel so attached to our spiritual master, just like Prabhupada felt so attached to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He said he first met him in 1922. He was invited by a friend. And at first he was saying, I have met so many of these sadhus, I am not interested. But his friend was insistent, Narendranath Malik. And he said, no, you must come. This sadhu is different. So Prabhupada came. He said the idea was that even at that time he was considered amongst his friends as a leader. So Narendranath Malik was thinking, if Prabhupada accepted this personality, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, then all this group of friends would also accept, since Prabhupada was the leader amongst them. So they came to the presence of Bhaktisiddhanta, who was very full of spiritual gravitas, serious personality, very replete with tremendous knowledge and devotion. And even as they were bowing down, these two young men, Srila Prabhupada and his friend, they were still bowing down, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, you are educated young men, you're speaking in English, you should preach this message of Lord Chaitanya to the people of the English-speaking world. He was immediately challenging them. And so Prabhupada, at that time, he was into Gandhi, he was a Gandhian, and so he argued with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in so many ways. India is a dependent country. Who will listen to India as a dependent country? First they must become independent, and then perhaps people will listen to something, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati defeated him. He said these isms, nationalism, socialism, capitalism, they're all isms. They're come and go. They're temporary. But the real need is self-realization. That is the need across all the isms, across all the nationalities, all the religions, self-realization. So Prabhupada said he was defeated, and he was very happy to be defeated. It's not that he was feeling sad about that. And he became convinced. And he said from that time, he accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as his spiritual master. And he was always thinking, from that time, that first meeting on, he was always thinking, how can I fulfill his request to give this knowledge to the English-speaking people of the world? So that is attachment to the Guru, that we see the validity of the Guru's message, we take it in the innermost core of our hearts, and we think, how can I give it to others? How can I fulfill this mission that my spiritual master has come to fulfill himself? So this is the personification of Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chittete Korea Aikya. And the next line also continues the same thought. Arna Koryo Mani Asa. Asa means hope or desire. There's something in Nectar of Devotion called Ashabandha. Means hope against hope. Oh, thank you. So Asha means hope or desire. So he's saying, Narottam Das Thakur is saying, except for this desire to make my consciousness one with the words coming from the lotus mouth of my spiritual master. I have no other desire, I have no other hope, I have no other want or need. This is the single most direction of my life. So that means it enters into every facet of our life, whether we're working, we're going to school, whether we're at home, whatever it is, we're thinking that I'm doing this for the pleasure of my spiritual master. And so that way the spiritual master remains very much present in our lives. And we become more and more attracted to hear from him, to please him. It becomes the focus. And that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to continually strive for his personal presence. That's not very realistic. Prabhupada said he was in the presence of his spiritual master only 12 or 14 times. But those times were very meaningful to him. They were very profound instructions that he got from his spiritual master. Sometimes chastisement, sometimes reflection on the situation in the Gaudiya Math, the organization that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta started. So it wasn't physical proximity. That's not really necessary. The idea is this chitte te kuri aikya. My consciousness becomes one with the consciousness of the Guru, with the words of the Guru. And that becomes the association. That becomes what's meaningful. And when we come to that point purely, then our spiritual master will be able to give us directions. And we see that. I was mentioning yesterday how Prabhupada received directions from his spiritual master years after his spiritual master passed away. So that's a reality. Such personalities are not confined as we are confined. The next line is Sri Guru Charane Rate Ese Uttamagati. That means attachment to his lotus feet. This is the highest destination. So again, feet. The feet are used repeatedly. This refers to service. The feet are always serving the body. So we always want to be in this mood, the submissive mood of service. Not to feel that we are in any way superior, we can instruct the spiritual master. This is not the attitude of the disciple, but we want to please him with our sincerity and our seriousness. And it doesn't mean also that it's always grave. Prabhupada had a very striking sense of humor. There was a time when Ambarish Prabhu, his disciple, who's a descendant of Henry Ford, the great-grandson of Henry Ford. So Prabhupada arrived in Detroit, and Ambarish was assigned to pick him up from the Detroit airport and drive him to the temple. So in Detroit, they're driving from the airport to the temple, and there's an enormous tire just by the side of the road. Goodyear tires, like an advertisement. Huge, huge thing. And Prabhupada, they drove past it, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, the deity of Detroit." So he had a great sense of humor. And it would come. In our film, you'll see there's an interview. We'll be seeing it soon, that some reporter asked Prabhupada. It was an interview that took place in an airport just after Prabhupada arrived. And the reporter said, "So what will happen in America if everyone took to this Krishna consciousness?" And Prabhupada said, "Oh, the people will be very happy and peaceful." He said, "There will be no more hippies." And the reporter said, "So what would you consider as a hippie? What do you think is a hippie?" And Prabhupada looked at him and he said, "You know better than I what is a hippie." And the reporter said, "Someone who takes drugs?" And Prabhupada looked at him and he thought for a moment and he said, "Something extraordinary." As I said, he was completely unused to this concept of taking drugs and as loose relationships between boys and girls. It was something extraordinary. So here we have Sri Guru Charane Rate Ese Uttamagati. What it's translated here. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. So that's the next line. Ye prasade, by his mercy. Pure sarva asa. So this pure here means fulfills, sarve all, asa, again, this desires or hopes. So this line confused me for a long time, that if I please the spiritual master, if I worship him, all my desires will be fulfilled. How is this possible? I have so many desires. And then I realized gradually that if we actually come to this point, chitte te korea aikya, that our consciousness is one in the purpose with the consciousness of the words of the spiritual master, then our desires will be pure. Our desires will be spiritual. And at that point, the spiritual master will fulfill all our spiritual desires. You follow? Now I may have so many mixed desires that I want this material thing and that material thing, and so many hodgepodge of desires. But once our desires are purified by the process of bhakti yoga, which we can attain by taking shelter of the lotus feet, the only way we can attain it, by taking shelter of those lotus feet of the of the spiritual master, then at that time, slowly, slowly, all we want is Krishna, and service to Krishna, and service to his devotees and his representatives. And when our desire is like that, then they'll be completely fulfilled, beyond our imaginings, by the mercy of the spiritual master. Ye prasade pure sarva asa. Such a profound line, there's so much meaning in this simple Bengali. Chakudana dilo ye janme janme prabhu se. So he opens my darkened eyes, just like we have this prayer, Om Ganat Marandasya Gananjana. So we were born into ignorance. Everyone is born into ignorance. But it's the spiritual master that awakens us. So the same thing is said by here by Narottam Das Thakur. But he goes on, Janme Janme Prabhu se. Now there was a spiritual master from another Gaudiya Math that came to visit us in Sharanagati one year. His name is Bodhayan Maharaj, and he has great respect and love for Srila Prabhupada. And he spoke about this Janme Janme Prabhu se, and he said that his spiritual master, who is Prabhupada's godbrother, explained that in every birth, if we are sincere and serious, a spiritual master will come into our lives, a spiritual master. But someone in the audience pointed out to him that Prabhupada referred to this same phrase here, Janme Janme Prabhu se. He is my Lord, life after life. And Prabhupada said that Prabhupada, would come back to his spiritual children, his disciples, again and again until they were free of this material situation that they were in. So it was a difference of opinion between Prabhupada's godbrother and Prabhupada, what these few words meant. So Bodhayan Maharaj thought about it for a moment, and he said, if your spiritual master, Prabhupada, said that, that means that's what he's going to do. That in some way or other he'll come to his disciples, his sincere disciples, and help them if they happen to take another birth. So it reminds me of the story of Bilvamangala Thakur. Bilvamangala Thakur was a very unfortunate Brahmin, that he was with a prostitute, and he went through all sorts of tribulations one day to be with this prostitute, crossing a river without a boat, and in pouring rain, and climbing over the wall, and it was just unbelievable. And so he comes to Chintamani, this prostitute, in a wretched situation, and she looks at him and said, if you have this much devotion to Krishna, how you could advance spiritually. And from that moment, his life changed. And he understood that his spiritual master was teaching him through Chintamani. And he, later on, when he wrote books, he recognized her for awakening him in this way. So the spiritual master can do very creative things to help his disciples. And Prabhupada, from his own words, he said that he will come for his disciples. Janme Janme Prabhu se. Then Divya Gyan Ride Prokasita, such a beautiful line, that Divya, this transcendental knowledge, Divya Gyan, Ride, within the heart, it is awakened by the teachings of the spiritual master. So not only does he open my eyes, which are closed in darkness, but he gives me this transcendental knowledge. Both things are there. How important the spiritual master is, we cannot underestimate. Prema bhakti yaha hoite avidya vinasayate. So here we have the English translation. From him ecstatic prem emanates. Prema bhakti yaha hoite. By him ignorance is destroyed. Avidya vinasayate. Vinasa is a very strong word, this destruction of ignorance. So, such a service he does. And as a result, Vede Gai Yaha Charito, Yahara Charito, the Vedas sing of his glories. The Vedic scriptures, they can be summarized by glorifying the spiritual master. Because in fact, unless we have him in our lives, how do we have direction? How do we have guidance? How do we know how to live? How to raise our children? How to do a job properly in the proper consciousness? All these things are a mystery unless we have the guidance of our spiritual master. So you could say there's one hand that he gives this exalted philosophy, and also on the other hand, he's living it himself. And he's very endearing to us, the way, there's so many hundreds and hundreds of stories about Prabhupada, and how he endeared himself to his disciples. It wasn't only this very exalted philosophy, but it was very grounded in day-to-day living, day-to-day activities, appreciating the service of the people that were cooking for him. There was one incident where Prabhupada had, in his room in Mayapur, he gathered all these big leaders, the GBC were there. At that time there weren't so many of them as there are now. His room is very small in Mayapur. So he was there, and whatever he felt, for whatever reason, he called up the two simple Bengali ladies who had cooked his lunch that day. And in front of these GBC men, he was glorifying them for their sincere service. How they took such care in cooking, and it was such an attractive meal and so nourishing as well. So in that way, he didn't overlook the service of anyone, because whatever service a person does, if it's done sincerely, that's marked by Krishna and appreciated by Krishna, and also by the spiritual master. So it's not that one can think. Prabhupada would say in a lecture sometimes that if you're editor of Back to Godhead, you should not think, oh, I'm editor of this very important magazine, so I'm very important. And you are better than the person who is cleaning the floor in the temple. This is not the proper consciousness. That anyone who is serving Krishna sincerely, whatever that service is, that is glorified and glorious and should be appreciated by all devotees. That's part of the beauty of Krishna consciousness. So, Sri Guru Karuna Sindhu, our spiritual master, is an ocean of mercy. Adama Janara Bandhu, the friend of the poor. And we are all poor spiritually. So he's the friend of all of us. Lokanath Lokera Jivana, the life of the devotees. And also, this is written by Narottam Das Thakur, so his spiritual master is Lokanath. So here he is also glorifying Lokanath Das Goswami. Here it says here, he's the friend of the poor and Lord and Master of the devotees. Haha Prabhu Koradoya, oh my dear Master, is crying out, please give me your mercy. Deho more parachoya, give me the shade of your lotus feet. What a beautiful phrase, that we want to be in the shade of his lotus feet. Not that we want to stand before him waving, here I am. No, but just the humble service attitude. And then the final line is, Ebeyas Gusuk Tribhuvana, that he's famous throughout the three worlds. His fame is spread all over the three worlds, because he's rendering this very selfless service. Prabhupada writes in the 4th canto that sometimes the disciples of the spiritual master, they're not acting up to the standard the spiritual master expects, so there may be some reaction that the spiritual master receives for the misbehavior of his disciples. He may get bad dreams, he may have some physical reaction. There was a time that Prabhupada was very sick in Vrindavan. He had a high fever. And he was saying that his leaders are not following the basic principles, the regulative principles, and chanting Hare Krishna 16 rounds every day, and therefore he was so ill. So he put an appeal out, please follow, otherwise the reaction can come to him. So this vow that we take at the time of initiation, and part of the terrible qualities of this age of Kali, we can go on for a long time about the terrible qualities of the age of Kali, and one of them is that we say something in all seriousness, we take a vow before the spiritual master, before the deities, before the sacred fire, before the Vaishnavas, and then sometime later we think, well, I was young then. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. Or, circumstances were good then, but now the circumstances are different. Well, you look at Grandfather Bhishma, he made a vow, and he stuck to that vow, a very serious vow for a Kshatriya to remain celibate his entire life. And his own mother, his own spiritual master, could not waver him. Because at that time, words meant something. You said something, and it had some meaning. But now, from our president onward and downward, words can be fabricated. You can change them from one day to the next. This is one of the evils of Kali Yuga, and we have to protect ourselves from that evil. That it doesn't mean that because everyone else is taking their own words lightly that we should do that. That's not the example to follow. The example to follow is the example of Srila Prabhupada and personalities like Grandfather Bhishma. Just like Prabhupada, he said that when he first met his spiritual master in 1922, and he heard the mission of his spiritual master, the desire, he would have joined immediately, but he was married, and he had a child, and he thought it would be an injustice. So marriage is a very serious thing. It's not to be taken lightly. So he spent from 1922 to 1959, how many years is that, fulfilling his grihastha duties. And then his children were grown. He could put his wife under the care of his children, and then he left at such an old age. But because he took it very seriously, this responsibility. So it's one of the shocking things in the West that Prabhupada faced. Govinda Dasi was telling me a story that Prabhupada had two disciples who went to open a temple in New Mexico. And one of them is the husband, Subal was his name, not related to our Subal. His mother was in New York, and she became ill at some point, so he went to visit her. And while he was gone, his wife had an affair with someone who was visiting the temple, a temple guest. And Subal came back and faced this situation, and then Prabhupada heard about it, and Prabhupada was so disturbed. This is in the early days, still in the 60s. Prabhupada, Govinda Dasi said he was so disturbed and so disillusioned. He said, how can I preach among these people? They have no respect for the marriage vows, what to speak of any other vows. And he was thinking of going back to India, but then finally what he did was he told Subal to travel with Prabhupada, and he told his former wife and the boyfriend, you live outside the temple, and every month you give $100 to the temple to help support the temple. So that's the way he tried to resolve it. But it was such a shock for him that people would take these very solemn vows so lightly. That was not his culture, not his training, not within the compass of his thoughts. And he had to deal with this very loose behavior. What to speak of people taking initiation vows and then not taking them seriously. Sannyas vows and then giving up sannyas. It's a terrible thing. But that doesn't mean that we can learn from that. And within ourselves we can think, I gave my word. I should not give my word unless I'm serious that I can fulfill that word. And once I do, then I don't find excuses. I don't look for excuses. I just do what I vowed to do. So these are some thoughts. I hope there's some discussion on these points. It's a wonderful topic. Yes, please.
Thanks a lot. It's really very deep and wonderful class. Really inspiring. When I hear some bhajans, the inspiration I'm talking from my perspective. When I hear some bhajans, the inspiration stays for little. But whenever I hear anything about spiritual master, that inspiration I get lasts really long. But again, going back to our practical life, it's after sometimes you go into your own things. How do we practically reconnect to these